Good morning. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, if that is the case, and welcome to the third OpenEd webinar. Today, I would like to start by reminding you that in order to obtain your certificate, you need to participate in at least 8 out of the 10 planned webinars and answer the 3 questions that will be placed in the chat section during the lecture. On this regard, we have a recurring question about if you will be able to answer the questions if you see the presentations on delay. It is also important to share that all the presentations, as well as the questions to obtain the certificate, are being shared on the events webpage. I'm gonna share my screen just for a little while to show you how you can access the webpage and find the presentations and the forms to answer the questions. Here, I'm going to the GUN webpage, and here I have to choose schedule. And here you can find all the previous webinars. For example, here the first one, Open and Inclusive Education, and you have to click on the circle with the arrow, and that way you'll be able to find the presentations both in Spanish and English, the webinars if you want to watch them again or for the first time, and the final thing you can find is the form to answer the questions. And that way you can still catch up and you can still watch the previous webinars to obtain the certificate. Today, we have Professor Joanne Catherine Bever, who has a master's in library science and a PhD in education. She is Canada Council Research Chair, Tier 2 in Deaf Education. She is Faculty of Education in the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Professor Bever is a researcher. I'm going to stop sharing, I'm sorry. Professor Bever is a researcher in bilingual bimodal deaf education, sign and spoken languages. Her areas of interest include arts-based language and literacy, multimodal literacy, visual literacy, and intercultural pedagogy. She has designed and created ebooks for deaf and hard of hearing students. It is an honor to be able to hear you today, Professor Weber, with the subject ebook creation, current considerations for deaf and hard of hearing students. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate this opportunity to present. I feel quite honored and I'm excited about today. I just want to start by saying I'm not the only one who worked on this presentation. There was a team effort in this way. So I do want to acknowledge Dr. Michael Skyer from the National Technical Institute in Rochester, the US. As well, I want to acknowledge Michelle Braley from Library Publishing at the University of Alberta. These are part of the team that have been behind me and supporting this whole experience. I'm so excited to be here, knowing that so many of you from around the world will be able to get this information. You'll see that my format of presenting is different than what you may be used to. The use of text is very limited. The use of images is more prominent. So you'll be seeing for yourself parts of what we're looking for when we're creating ebooks for deaf and hard of hearing children. Now we'll be looking at really students in the K to 12 age range when we do this presentation. Thank you very much.
This presentation will discuss the creation of ebooks. There is a long list of considerations when looking to address the needs of deaf and hard of hearing learners. To begin, we need to look at the framework used in the creation of ebooks for deaf learners. This presentation will discuss while some frameworks may fit their needs. Not all do. Presentations when looking to address the needs of deaf and hard of hearing learners. There is a long list of considerations. By analyzing the models out there, the needs of deaf and hard of hearing learners. The features again, we need to look at the framework used and create a new framework for deaf learners. We need to look at the framework used in the creation of the 5 lenses. While some frameworks may fit their needs, universal design, not all do.
Pardon me, everyone. Technical problems. It's a pre-recorded lecture. It's just a matter of getting it shared to you, which was working minutes ago.
Features that fit deaf learners' needs, levels of accessibility, and create a new framework and open education. Do the deaf consultants retain the power to decide the 5 lenses? By selecting the appropriate elements, these are universal design. We can create a new framework, multimodal learning principles. UNESCO has been a tremendous leader in producing resources to promote levels of accessibility or ebooks and open education resources. UNESCO has identified various stakeholders. By selecting the appropriate elements for each of these models, firstly, the Ministry of Education for the country in question has the power to create policy to encourage or mandate the development of ebooks. Publishers have the platform to make accessible content available to teachers using UDL principles.
Let's just start this once more.
It keeps opening up the wrong window. It's not working. I'm lost. I don't know what to do.
So I apologize. I'm a bit lost. It was just working.
We had the window open before. Okay. I don't understand why they can't see it. Just a minute. I'm trying to get into YouTube. I don't know why I'm getting into YouTube. Just a minute.
In this regard, it is important that deaf people are involved in the process. If hearing interpreters are involved in creating translations, do they?
Okay.
This presentation will discuss the creation of ebooks. There is a long list of considerations when looking to address the needs of deaf and hard of hearing learners.
But I want to do them.
At the framework used in the creation of ebooks for deaf learners. While some frameworks may fit their needs, not all do. By analyzing the models out there, we can select the features that fit deaf learners' needs and create a new framework. The 5 lenses we will explore are universal design, multimodal learning principles, deaf aesthetics principles, levels of accessibility, and open education resources, OER. By selecting the appropriate elements from each of these models, we can create a new framework appropriate for deaf learners. We'll begin by looking at universal design for deaf learners. The theory of universal design originated at North Carolina State University in 1991. Their center was promoting principles of universal design and accessibility for all people, whether in the built environment or the manufacturing of products. The center's philosophy was broad, not focused on the specific needs of persons with disabilities, but the needs of everyone. Today, most of us, however, do think universal design is geared only toward accessibility for persons with disabilities. A primary principle of universal design is to meet the needs of the broadest number. Any accommodation or adaptation in design undertaken to serve one group cannot be to the detriment of another group. The deaf community came together to carefully consider how the design of educational materials would be accessible for deaf learners. One task the deaf community undertook was to create a specific accessibility checklist of the elements compatible to the learning needs of deaf and hard of hearing students. The National Deaf Center on Post-Secondary Outcomes developed universal design for learning guidelines for classrooms. However, nothing has been done in this regard for ebooks. The center emphasizes that UDL should be focused on the deaf learner's innate strengths, capitalizing on vision and visual processing. The learning environment should provide learning options through various senses, emphasizing visual options. As well, language options should be part of the environment, including sign language. The National Deaf Center states instructional design must include options for self-expression, including signing, writing, and speaking. By the same token, there must be options for comprehension through multimodal learning, using multiple senses such as vision, hearing, touch, movement. Universal design guidelines are sometimes problematic for deaf learners. Let's explore that further. The main issue with current universal design relates to biosocial portals. Biosocial portals link the physical self to our interactions with others. What we find is that universal design is predominantly audio-centric, which means the physical ability to hear dominates our lives, our communication, our language use, and the learning process. Our cultural and language beliefs are connected to our physical experiences. Audio-centric biosocial portals processing starts when we are young, as spoken language begins to develop. Everyone, everything, the whole world is audio-centric. Our world is based on the assumption that everyone can hear. The evidence? Radios, public announcement systems at airports, the volume controls on the TV and all devices, the ubiquity of music in our environment. The whole world is designed for people who can hear. This is where some of the universal design principles are dominated by auditory and spoken language approaches in terms of how the information is provided. In contrast, visuocentrism relies on the visual biosocial portal for processing, not hearing. This is where sign language comes in. It's a visual spatial language. UNICEF has developed prototypes that attempted to incorporate multiple portals. It provides examples of learning design to engage specifically hearing, vision, touch, movement, and interaction when developing accessible ebook. On this slide, you can see one sample I pulled from UNICEF's prototypes. It has text, it has audio track, it has images to aid comprehension. There is a sign language translation in the window in the bottom corner. All those elements are incorporated into the lesson. Let's turn our attention to multimodal learning. Multimodal learning is the next major framework I want to explore. Let's see what the multimodal framework has to offer us with respect to the new framework we set out to create. Multimodal learning is another approach we can incorporate into our ebook design. Let's explore exactly what's involved. Comprehension is supported and enhanced through writing, seeing, spatial, tactile, gestural, auditory, and oral elements. The principle behind this approach is to incorporate as many modalities as possible in the learning process. Multimodal learning takes advantage of multiple mediums, such as print on paper, or using a computer, signing using a camera and video, speaking using audio recordings. Multimodal learning uses multiple mediums, which enhances learning. Multimodal learning is about making meaning. In our everyday lives, we are always interpreting what's going on around us, interpreting the words people are using, the meaning of that movie, the point of a text we are reading. We are always in a process of making meaning in our environments. We do that through the representations of meaning, be it speaking, text, video, signing. Obviously, making meaning is through communication. That's why multimodal learning is so complex. It's layered. Many things are happening at the same time. With so many options to consider in multimodal learning, what must we include in the design of an ebook? The design must be strategic, logically connected. We can't just throw a bunch of images, video, and text to appear as visual as possible. Careful thought is needed to structure the content on the screen to support learning. Multimodal digital learning is now getting more attention from researchers. In particular, Carapi and Corbetis did some fascinating research on multimodal digital learning for deaf learners. In their findings, design requirements included sign language dictionaries, excellent search functions, good quality video, along with text. Placement of content on the screen, including images, needs to be carefully considered. There needs to be a flow in the design that supports comprehension and multimodal learning. So the takeaway is that layout and design are key when the goal is to support visual learning. In this part of the presentation, I'll be talking about designing ebooks with deaf aesthetics in mind. So what exactly is deaf aesthetics? It is a variety of approaches to instructional design that is tailored to the needs of deaf and hard of hearing people. It's based on documentation demonstrating their significant impact on learning. In deaf aesthetics, we want to create an artful design such that the learning experience will be enhanced and enjoyable. There is beauty in the teaching. That's the quick definition of deaf aesthetics. When we increase deaf aesthetics in our ebook creation, we also increase ethical access to the material. The two go hand in hand. There are several aspects to deaf aesthetics. The first I want to cover is language modes. There are many different modes for languages. For our purposes, we'll be talking about 3 modes: sign language, spoken language, and written language. The diversity of language modes used in the ebook should reflect the diversity of language modes used in the deaf and hard of hearing population. Sign language and written language should be represented equally. There are several aspects of equity to consider. For example, the space on the screen should be equal for each mode. One is not more prominent than the other. Secondly, the content covered must be conceptually equivalent. The sign language videos should be embedded in the text. As the reader scrolls through, the video can be watched simultaneously. The sign video should not be a separate link, forcing the user to link out. Videos should have a large enough space for the viewer to see the signs and face of the signer. The viewer needs to be able to see clearly the hand shapes, facial expressions, body movements, and shoulder angle changes. All these elements have meaning in sign language, which is why a large space is necessary. All signers must be fluent, native signers, in the sign language used in the learner's community. In ebook design, there are a number of elements to consider regarding deaf aesthetics, which introduces complexity. For example, you need a clear, clean, visual aesthetic. The screen should not be too busy. Busyness is visual noise. Less is better. Just a few pertinent elements, like you see here on the screen. me signing, one image, and one word. That's it. If the screen is filled with multiple elements, it becomes visually distracting for the learner, and the goal of your message will be lost. There are a number of tools that you can play around with to creatively enhance the design, such as color, shape, layout, font, spacing, sizing, and many more. Some of these elements can be used with a text, others with images, such as maps, graphics. There are many image options available. When using text blocks, it is important to use short paragraphs. Line lengths should not be the full width of the screen. Use short line lengths, around 10 words. It's a good idea to use plain language. By that, I mean avoiding flowery language and unnecessary jargon. The writing should be straightforward and clear. Navigation, getting to where you want to go, is an important design requirement. I'm going to use the term wayfinding, meaning the choices people make to get to where they want to go. Wayfinding includes the use of clickable graphic icons. It includes sign language modalities through clickable photo images of signs. Visual elements, such as these, should be paired with their textual equivalents. The navigation function should incorporate glossaries to assist the learner with new vocabulary. The content of the glossary needs to be provided in sign language and written language. The glossary's keyword search functions should be supported in both languages. Interactivity is important in deaf education generally, and is as critical in ebook design as well. Visual design for interactivity can significantly impact the learning experience, and there are many options to choose from. Let's begin with video. Videos should have clickable images and keywords which link to supplementary content. Examples of supplementary content could be vocabulary definitions, additional examples of a topic, or alternate signs for a concept. This type of interactivity extends the learning. Remember that on the screen, the presentation of signing and text should be equivalent. However, the learner should have the choice to engage in just one language mode, as well as move easily back and forth between modality options. If you are using multiple videos inside ebooks, then you can expect people will want to know how to create content themselves to post or to respond to others. The threads for these interactions should be easy to find. If the technology allows for video posting, then you must also have the necessary tech support for ebook video editing using graphics software. Up till now, I have been talking about ebook design functions. Now let's look specifically at content design. It is critical that the diversity of the deaf community be represented in the ebook content. If the deaf members of the community come with different backgrounds and different identities, those should be reflected in the ebook content as well as the videos. Representations of racial diversity, cultural diversity, ability and disability diversity, as well as age diversity. Content should be language rich in order to stimulate and promote language acquisition, language learning, and bilingualism. Let's move from deaf aesthetics and look at another framework. I now want to explore levels of accessibility. Keep in mind that many deaf children grow up in environments without exposure to quality language, neither in sign language or spoken language. In those cases, making materials accessible is even more complex. The deaf child will try to hear what they are able in the spoken environments around them. The brain tries to make sense of the inferior input to decipher patterns. Because there are so many gaps, the brain does not develop a proper language system. The brain begins to get hardwired into a deficit of language development. The brain cannot decipher the grammar, vocabulary, concepts being communicated. It's trying to make sense of bits and pieces without any foundation from all the partial input. Over time, the deprivation will become permanent. Some creators of ebooks believe embedding a sign language translation equates to accessibility for deaf learners. But we know now many deaf children are language deprived. Understanding the text or the signing may be beyond their abilities. Research has revealed that there are 3 levels of accessibility for deaf learners. The first level of accessibility relates to the learning management system, or the courseware. This level pertains to the digital hardware used, as well as the course design features like captioning, images, videos, and other material created for the lesson. At this level, we're focusing on how the student interacts with the learning material through the digital interface and management system. Level 1 requires internet stability, but without it, you don't have level 1 accessibility. Spoken and signed media must have captions or subtitles. Videos must be translated. The presentation must have a clean design on the screen. Navigation and search functions are part of level 1 access. Level 2 access focuses on the interactivity between the learner and the content. The lesson design includes components for the learner to interact with and respond to the material. Examples include answering questions, completing a quiz, clicking an icon to start a video, and moving graphics around on the screen for matching exercises. Level 2 accessibility relates to the presentation of content. Examples include PDF files, documents, visual lectures, images, plain language texts, and interactive activities. Developing level 3 accessibility is very complex. The focus of this level is developing language and communication skills. The written content in the lesson must consider the print literacy of the learner and what language challenges they may have. Sign language must be the primary language of instruction. Many online materials are not designed for deaf learners. E-learning material often looks inclusive on the surface, such as captioning videos or providing a transcript of audiovisual content. This appears to be accessible, but often does not meet the needs of deaf learners. Content translated into sign language is restricted to the camera frame. So if I'm pointing to something in the distance, the viewer cannot see what it is because of the limits of the camera frame. Am I pointing to the sky, a tree? You don't know because you can't see it. If I am sitting down, you don't know if I'm sitting on a couch, a chair, or even on the ground because it's below the frame. It's important to understand that visual spatial languages require everything to be seen in the frame. Most ebook creations don't incorporate these visual references. Deaf students benefit from immediate feedback. If they are misunderstanding or headed in the wrong direction, they need quick corrections to get them back on track. Delayed corrections or feedback will lead to confusion and lost time. The lesson content needs to include multiple and varied visual materials, such as diagrams, concept maps, charts, visual representations that reinforce the concepts. Ebooks are designed to cover specific content. For deaf learners, that content must be translated into sign language. Beyond that, the ebook should have sign language glossaries for the vocabulary being taught. Definitions of concepts must also be available in sign language. Deaf learners need more time to process information, especially written information. If they are a struggling reader, they will need more time and support. Deaf learners need opportunities to interact with peers, both hearing and deaf. To summarize the definitions of the 3 levels of accessibility, Level 1 deals with the courseware and learning management system. Level 2 deals with the learning design and the interface with the learner. Level 3 considers overtly language and communication development. This level supports language acquisition. Now we'll discuss the final framework that will contribute to the new framework we are building. Let's explore open educational resources. We'll start by looking at the relationship between open education practices and open education resources. There are 5 principles of open education practices. The first and foundational principle is that of collaboration and sharing information. Collaboration and sharing should lead to value-added creativity and the production of more resources. The next principle is about initiating and maintaining connection to a community, a network, so that learning and teaching resources and practices are shared so we can better meet the learning needs of students. The objective of open education practices is to grow our collective knowledge and resources, to grow open education access. Our practices should invite critiques and analyses so that the efficacy of the resources and practice, or lack thereof, can be identified so improvements can be made. These inquiries can lead to serendipitous findings and lead to innovations not foreseen. A problem with current open education practices is that they don't always consider multilingual language acquisition. The reality that deaf learners are using a sign and written language hasn't really factored into our practices yet. Current OER and sign language translations are somewhat in conflict. Consider the mediums for the languages. Spoken languages uses text and is audio-centric. Sign languages use video. Video is our paper. Resources need to be translated, but how do we determine who is qualified to do the translations? Translations go in 2 directions, print to sign and sign to print. Who is qualified though? Are there licensure issues? Another consideration is how the translation will be paid for. These translation expenses are in addition to the cost of the original ebook. Another consideration is how much of the OER can be translated. Producing proper translation takes a lot of time, including studio time. Producing a translated ebook requires high quality equipment and the human resources to do the editing. It's a big commitment. Here's another consideration. Who is qualified to evaluate the quality of the translation? Who has the power to decide the translation is done well enough? In this regard, it is important that deaf people are involved in the process. If hearing interpreters are involved in creating translations, do they have the necessary skills to do the work? Are they trusted in the community? Do the deaf consultants retain the power to decide the translation is done well enough? These are important issues and should not be overlooked. UNICEF has been a tremendous leader in producing resources to promote digital textbooks or ebooks. UNICEF has identified various stakeholders and their roles in the creation of ebooks. Firstly, the Ministry of Education for the country in question has the power to create policy to encourage or mandate the development of ebooks. Publishers have the platform to make accessible content available to teachers using UDL principles. Technologists support the development of the learning management system, and determine the necessary software. Teachers curate the materials, design and plan the lessons, and teach the material. Students are stakeholders as the end user of the ebooks. Non-governmental organizations recruit evaluators to determine the effectiveness of the ebook. Finally, UNICEF provides technical assistance and support to governments for implementation. I would like to genuinely commend UNICEF for all its efforts supporting open education. To finish my presentation, I would like to add 3 more resources to our repertoire of open education resources. First, deaf human resources. Elegant, fluent signers. Ebook creators need to have input from deaf talent. Secondly, linguistic resources. Sign language and linguistic research. These resources can be used to support translation, support learners' language acquisition. It's readily available. Lastly, we need stakeholder groups to support the development and creation of ebooks. So where have I been headed with all of this? I wish to introduce a new framework for open education resources and open education practices. A framework that incorporates universal design principles, deaf aesthetics, all levels of accessibility, and multimodal learning. Future research needs to consider the following questions. An evaluation of this lens or framework by designing an ebook prototype. What steps need to be taken to translate this knowledge to other countries? What features of the prototype work or not work for deaf learners in other countries? We need to investigate the necessary training and infrastructure needed to support ebooks using this framework. And finally, we need to investigate what kind of OER repository would best meet the needs of users. Thank you. I have a link here that you can see to an ebook sample. I invite you to review it. It's part of this presentation, and it'll provide much more information to you. So I suggest you check it out. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Weber. I think that this has definitely been an enriching experience. We realize that the world is created
webinar session
in an audio-centric way, but you just presented new paths and options for action. And these are new challenges for us.
Focusing on the editor and the editor
So
specifically.
now I want to share with you that we have a lot of comments, and we invite all the audience to make your questions. But while we're waiting, I'm sorry, let me.
A few notes before we get started. The first is
I'm hearing the translation. I don't know why.
And that's gonna, be the case for the duration of.
But while we wait, I want to read to you some comments. Can you hear me well?
I can hear both. I can hear you and I can hear the translation.
Also, but I don't know why.
At least with voice. So we do have a question section there in your GoToWebinar control panel. You'll see there it says questions. Feel free to use.
Yeah, it's all right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. already ready. We have a lot of comments, congratulatory messages and comments, but we are waiting for some questions. I hope the audience make a lot of questions, but while we're waiting, we have a comment that says, there's a profile called Enseñar con Innovación Educativa 4.0, which means teaching with 4.0 educational innovation that says innovation, disruption, and inclusion in one lecture. Also, Professor Mustafa Sam from Egypt says, wonderful presentation and very helpful for information. Thank you. Israel We says, very interesting what has been said. We have another comment from Rita Garcia. She says, to have an inclusive education, it is important to take action. I currently have a student with deafness, and I will try to apply what I have learned today.
Thank you for that.
Danis Cruz says, excellent work proposal that leaves us a great reflection and challenge to work on this great gap in teaching. And there is also a question from Danis Cruz that says, what methodological recommendation could you give us when a local sign language is not enriched with vocabulary, in order to implement ebook projects in sign language?
Okay, in terms of that question, well, I'm not sure how you're evaluating that sign language as not being enriched with vocabulary, but you're right that that language may not have the same level of technical vocabulary as the spoken and written language. But what you should maybe do is work with linguists. We have deaf and hearing linguists that are doing worldwide research on the sign languages of different regions and different countries. And so they may have research or dictionaries or other resources available that you can check on. So I would suggest first checking with your local university, researchers in the area, and if you can, make connections in your local deaf community. So you may not realize how rich the sign language is for your area.
Thank you very much, Professor. We have another question from Danis Cruz that says, what is your opinion about the educational model in which deaf and hearing people do not coexist?
That's a challenge because it's true, deaf people do tend to stick together. But why wouldn't you? Because you're sharing the same language. If hearing people who are Spanish speaking in an English environment are tending to stick together too. So that's the point. Communication, language. So my opinion is that you need to partner with the deaf community and assuming you are hearing, and you have to value sign language and give support to educating deaf kids with sign language. We all need to do both. We need to speak as much as we can, if we can, but also learn the written form of a spoken language. But we also need to respect sign language. And for North America, English is a primary spoken language, but American Sign Language is the primary sign language, though there are other sign languages. But the point is to work together between the two communities and not be dominating over the deaf community.
Thank you very much, Professor. We have another comment that says, from Professor Enedina Carmona, please, could you share some suggestions for creating ebooks for the hearing impaired? I am interested in delving into ebook development. Thank you very much in advance.
Well, next week I'll be talking just about that. One particular approach to ebooks is through the platform Pressbooks. And I've been very impressed with what I can do with that. And it's now, open and available through many libraries and many universities and other institutions. So Pressbooks is what I would recommend. It's not perfect, but it's close. It's very close. So, and it's pretty easy to use. There are other platforms, but I'm not as familiar with them as I am with Pressbooks. But I'll be talking about that next week.
Thank you very much. Angelica Martinez asks, how many sign languages are there in Spanish and English? Is it possible to create one that unifies them?
Okay. From my perspective, obviously there's more than one I assume there's more than one kind of sign language in Mexico and in the Spanish speaking countries. But why would users want to unify? Do you want to unify your language into English, right? So so the quick answer is I don't know how many, but there will be different sign languages from different regions and different communities.
Thank you very much. Maria Eugenia Perez Duarte says, is a special platform required to host the files of this type of ebooks? What platform do you use to create the ebooks?
So that's similar to an earlier question. I use Pressbooks, and when you go to that link, you'll see how it can be organized. And it's really video friendly, Prezi friendly. Editing is easy. And you can use a number of softwares for your editing, but it's not. Yeah, the platform works well with Pressbooks.
Thank you again. She also says, is a special platform required to host the files of this type of electronic books? No, it's the same question, I think. I don't know.
Well, I can maybe add a little bit here. Many university libraries have Pressbooks. So that's there for part of their publishing services. And it should be available for free. So you're not paying out of pocket. You don't have to worry about those kinds of expenses. What you need to usually do is join the Pressbooks community, and then you can start creating and publishing ebooks. And like I said, I'll talk a little bit more about that next week. But Pressbooks is widely available and should be free.
I think this is the last question from Jaime Enrique Cortés Fandiño. What recommendations would you make for those who work as teachers and students on e-learning platforms such as Moodle?
I'm familiar with Moodle. We use it here in Canada as well, and that's fine. The only situation you need to consider is what I'm talking about is making ebooks, right? So it's different feel. It's different than Moodle. Like Moodle is related to coursework and coursework design, but Pressworks is sort of in between. So you have kind of the courseware in Moodle, and then Pressbooks has some of those same features. They're both internet-based, and they both have the courseware. So Moodle, you can just include some of the features that you saw me present on. I hope, does that answer your question?
I hope so. This has been really interesting. I want to thank you for showing us new options and new needs of learning. Please let me know if you want to say something else to finish this lecture.
Well, I would like to say thank you to Dr. Montoya. She helped me get set up here. I want to thank Dr. Michael Skyer for being involved in this project. And another a collaborator I've been working with is from Trinidad and Tobago. So I'm looking to create these relationships, and we're trying to make sure that we have the sign language options for all communities. We are looking to get a real strong team together and try and set up a good mechanism that will support your work, our work globally. That's the goal. But thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and thanks to the organizers.
Thank you very much, and I hope to see you next week.
Thank you.